Yeah, no, Martin is really helpful. I must admit, at the start, I was a bit confused. I didn't know what the difference, where I was getting into the native API and where I was finding the Thread API. Once I got that fixed, yeah, it seems to work fine for dealing with data. Dealing with the metadata is a bit trickier, but I'm sure you guys know that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my concern was to discuss about partial updates, which I think would be handy for Bob to have at this moment. I've been reviewing the issue in GitHub. It's hold on a second. 35. Yeah. Unfortunately, I haven't taken part in that discussion before. For me, the most handy thing to do would be just to accept the same posts as the one that's defined right now. In the facility registry documents. I'm looking for them. Okay. Just here in the update facility. But I think we should relax this bit. It says full resource representation of the facility, not a partial app. But I don't know why, which were the discussions that led to that decision. I'm looking here in the specifically on the updated facility method. I think if we relax that a bit and we say that instead of sending the full resource representation, we accept that we are sending partial updates and just update the values that are included in the post. In this case, it's the full, I think. That will be pretty handy to use, and it's a simple idiom, I think.
So the only compulsory field in there would just be the ID.
Exactly.
And then if you just post the ID and nothing else, then nothing would happen. But if you added a property, then that property would get updated. Yeah. I think that semantics is the simplest to understand.
Sorry?
No, I agree. I think the semantics of that would be the simplest to understand.
Yeah, because it doesn't make much sense to me that by sending an incomplete representation of the resource, you could be accidentally erasing values in the facility registry. Because, for example, DHIS just cares about a number of fields. Let's say, I don't know, 10 fields. And let's say in the facility registry there are 20. If you just send the 10 fields that you are interested in, I don't see a reason why the facility registry should erase the other values. That's what doesn't ring the bell to me.
Yeah, I mean a good example we have from Rwanda, where Randy Wilson's very happy to maintain a lot of the properties in DHIS, but he likes the ability to fix the coordinates in Resource Mapper. So, ideally we just wouldn't send you coordinates because your coordinates you have in Resource Mapper is probably going to be more accurate.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, a related point, but maybe the same coin flipped over, right? And we came across this a little bit last week, is the behavior when you're sending properties which are not understood by the other side. I don't think we've really defined what the behavior should be, but I think we should define that if it's a property you're not interested in, the consumer should just ignore it, just throw it away.
Yeah, I don't see. There's a trade-off there where you would like perhaps to be able to validate that what you're receiving is making sense. On the other hand, you want to be as flexible as possible as to what kind of requests you accept. I don't know what's.
I mean, if I could sort of give you an illustrative example from the DHIS perspective, the most straightforward thing to do if we're not going to customize for every particular environment would be to fill up that properties block with all the many and various properties that might be of interest in DHIS. Now, it's quite possible that a resource mapper facility registry may not be interested in all of those properties. Right? In its metadata, it's mapped 3 or 4 which are significant.
Yeah.
And so one interpretation it can make of the extra properties is to just throw them away, to ignore them. I think that's probably the most robust. The other alternative, I mean, there's 3 alternatives. Right? The other alternative is it rejects the message and says, no, this is kind of not valid. And the other alternative is it sort of dynamically updates and adds a new property for what it sees. That's maybe a bit dangerous because you could send junk to it, and then you'd end up just populating junk.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that the most sensible semantics to me seems to be to throw away what you don't want to store.
Yeah, I agree. That sounds reasonable. However, I'm not sure I can make a decision about that because, as I told you before, I haven't taken part in the previous discussions about this. I would like to know what everyone else involved thinks about.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we should raise it properly on the issue list, so other people can get their nose in. I was just raising it here because it's kind of like the flip side of that other issue. You know, what to do when the set of properties are incomplete is one case where we need to know how to deal with, and the other case is what to do when there's extra properties that we don't know about.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah, I can see 2 of you.
He's cloning himself. Maybe we can update the issue with the things we just discussed with Bob, which are, I think, 2. One is to relax the requirement that the facility you send is full. The other one is to define what we do when the API receives fields that the implementation doesn't care about. Well, something we can do is to relax the implementation before we relax the API. I mean the specification. That's something that we could do if that helps.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys are old enough to be aware of John Postel. John Postel was editor of the original TCP RFC.
Oh.
And John Postel has had a principle which I think survives to this day in terms of interoperability, which is to be liberal in what you accept
Yeah,
and
exactly.
conservative in what you give out.
Uh-huh.
I think generally if
Yeah.
we can deal sensibly with odd inputs and always be consistent with what we deliver.
Yeah, of course, I agree. The thing is that if other clients are expecting something different, your liberality can, I don't know, does that word even exist? Liberality? Li- Not
It'll
sure.
do.
But you get the point. Okay. But maybe you can harm others by being too liberal. I don't know. But I mostly agree with you. We should be more flexible on what we accept, and I think that's doable.
So I have a question, Bob. I think you outlined the three scenarios very succinctly. The first one's way too restrictive. The third one's too liberal. The middle one, where it just ignores what it doesn't understand. Would there be any response back to the consumer that those fields were not understood?
That's a good question. Do we currently return to the consumer the body of the facility that's being created or updated?
I think so.
Because if we do, I think that probably answers the question. Because the client could see, if it was interested, that the properties were less on what it was getting back to what it had posted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at least according to the specification, yeah, we should be returning the actual object that has been saved, both in the creation scenario and the updated scenario.
Right. So if we quietly drop properties, then if the client really wants to know that, it would see that on the return object.
Okay.
We could make that more complicated, but I think it's probably sufficient as it is.
Well, I think that just further strengthens your second scenario, because at least that way it is communicated back to me that something was not updated, and I can work on that on as far as my side. If I if I had wanted to update it, but I had improperly formatted my message, I'd get a response back, see that I didn't update the field that I had intended, it was ignored, and I can work on my side as to reformatting the next message.
Yeah. Scott, are you interested in creating in gathering more war stories from my experience last week and still this week? Yeah, it's good to be actually playing with code, because I mean we can talk about these things and make specifications till we're blue in the face, but when you start using them, the issues really come out. I think the other single biggest issue, I mean, besides the semantics around update, which I think are important, the other issue which has come up is the issue of how to set about updating metadata. And again, I'll give you a simple example. We have, I mean, Randy has decided, or the ministry have decided, or Randy has decided on behalf of the ministry, that, for example, facilities are categorized according to their ownership, right? You've got public facilities, you've got private facilities, you've got faith-based facility, whatever. I don't know all the categories. Now, we can represent those in terms of the JSON, in terms of if I'm sending the type property of a facility. I can put a code on it to indicate that it's private or it's public or it's. But we don't really have a good way of exchanging those codes. I guess what would be your the layers metadata in your layers speak. Yeah, all right. I mean, in DHIS, we've got a fairly clear representation of a kind of metadata XML and JSON, which is separate to the kind of data values.
Yeah, there's. I think Bob already knows that there's a layers request, but it's not thought as a generic API or.
Yeah.
So let me look for an example.
Yeah, there were. I mean, I have not read that issues list for a while, but there was talk of using an X form, for example, as one of the possible mechanisms. Is it good? Where do I sit on it? Look, there's a few things. A, it's not clear whether the exchange of metadata should necessarily be part of the Fred spec or not, or whether it's a sort of parallel thing that an implementation would have to support. So I'm not sure, for example, whether this is something we seriously need to nail down in terms of Fred API, but we need to nail it down in terms of our applications. Or whether we have to take the sort of deeper step and start mandating it in terms of Fred, that if these are the properties that an implementation supports, there has to be some way of kind of declaratively expressing those, whether it's in terms of a schema or whether it's in terms of an X form kind of representation. I don't really mind, to be honest, as long as there's a declarative way of doing it. So there's some message that we can pass to update things like the category codes or the district codes or province codes or that sort of thing.
Well, I think there's an easy way of defining properties with codes and labels in resource map. For example, let's say you have the category field from the UI. When you define the collection's metadata structure, you can say, okay, I have a category field, and if it's, let's say, it's called. So as long as that matches the corresponding IDs in DHIS, everything should work if DHIS pushes the right IDs. So I don't know how it's represented on the DHIS, right? But let's say public is 1. If in your post request you send category as the metadata in resource map is well defined to match that of DHIS, everything should work. It's like the geographic hierarchies. For example, we can use that value to be sure that we are talking about the same entity. and there's no need to interchange metadata in that case.
Martin, so your voice was kind of in and out there. I can see where you were typing.
Oh,
Maybe, I mean, category is not a good example, I guess, because there's not too many of them. I mean, maybe a better example is, yeah, okay, well, so what you're calling category. So, okay, let's look at type. Right now, type you can have something. Type you can have something like a primary health center. Spelled wrong. Now, that could have a code in it, and these will vary from country to country, but maybe the code for primary health center is PHC.
Yeah.
And similarly, you have dispensaries, you have district hospitals, you've got military hospitals, you've got all these various types of facility. And what they've done in Rwanda is they've coded all of those, right? So they have them as. Now, I'm not sure in Resource Mapper, can you right, the example you gave of category, you've got 1 equals private, 2 equals public. Are those integers, are they required to be integers, or could you use a string code there? So can I say PHC is primary health center and...
Exactly. Let me show you an example.
Okay.
I'm trying to move out the tab from Google.
Yeah, I've completely lost track, Scott. I go to Google every time, and I Google Fred API wiki and see what it comes up with. Yeah, it's a good thing, as long as we stay there now. And as long as it's the first one that comes up in Google, then we're good. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's actually very weird.
Here we are in the layers editor of resource map. So you can create a select one field for that case. So it would be type. That doesn't matter, and then you can see you can define all the values with a corresponding code for the options. So you would say, okay, the code is.
All right, I'm with you.
Yeah, it's. Yeah, it's more real to say.
It's always going to be implementation specific, but yeah, we try to encourage people not to use integers. Okay, so that's cool. So you enter them like that, Now, is there any way we can enter them programmatically? I mean, well, I mean, if you think in DHIS and in Resource Mapper, we're both having to maintain these same table of codes effectively. So we want to be able to exchange them.
Yeah.
Now, if they're not many, it's okay. You can enter them twice in both systems. But I mean, they will ultimately get out of sync unless we have a mechanism for keeping them there.
Yeah, there's a way. I mean, you could use the same API that our UI uses, but it's not going to be very comfortable. I would try to design something specifically for that.
Yeah, but I don't mind if it's sort of implementation specific, undocumented, whatever, at the moment. I think it's more important that we do it, and after we've done it, then we'll be in a stronger position to make concrete recommendations for how to formalize it, rather than the other way around.
Sure, I totally agree.
I mean, yes, Scott. There's a lot of divergence, I guess. I mean, in Resource Mapper, I guess most of these properties are just labels or tags, whereas in DHIS they actually can be mapped onto different kinds of entity depending on what they're for. For example, most of those category type things are similar. We have a table in DHIS called group organization unit groups, and the organization units belong to particular groups, which effectively gives you the same list as your list there that Martin was showing me. But other things are different. I mean, for example, total population, right? You have a population associated with the facility, catchment area. Now, in Resource Mapper, that would just be just another property, right? But whereas in DHIS, it's actually a what we call a semi-permanent data element. It's a time series thing, right? It's data that gets stored. We've got so we have the 2005 population, the 2006 population, etc. So it's not just a case of mapping a property to a property in that case. We're mapping a property to what I guess would be the most current population figure.
Yeah.
So there's a few of those impedance mismatches, if you use an electrical term, where we're essentially carrying similar data on both sides, but the kind of semantics and use of the data element is different.
Sure.
But nothing that's.
I think this case, Scott, would be to think of, for example, I don't know, do you have a crude form to create, let's say, these types, a new type, for example, in DHIS? Bob?
Sorry?
Do you have crude formularies to create types, for example? Like primary health center, let's say Randy wants to create a new type, which is secondary health center.
Yeah.
He would go to DHIS and create a new entity.
Yeah, let me see if I can show you how you do that.
Okay.
Let's see if I can share my screen. How do I share my screen? I'm not very technically savvy. Let's see. Alright, let me go. Okay, this is just a local instance. I don't know if there's. I hope there's sufficient in here to. Yeah, it's pretty empty. Okay, so you're talking about the organization units. Right. You see, we have this thing called organization group set, of which, there we go, this type, ownership, admin, unit, etc. Right, these, we can make a new one. I don't want to do. If we take an existing one, let's say type,
Yeah.
and these are the various groups which are assigned to types. A group
Okay.
is, and so to make a new group, it's a little bit pedestrian. We're going to go back. We'll make a new group: name, short name, code, symbol, etc. Can I do one?
Okay, so the code is PHC in this case, for
Sorry?
example.
I think
No, you are in organization unit group. What about
yeah, PHC possibly already exists, but I'll make a new one. Hang on, let's add a new group. Let's say, for example, I don't want to say dispensary because I think it's already there. Pharmacy. Right?
Okay.
We'll give pharmacy a code. Farm.
Okay.
Right? We can, I don't know if it's necessary to actually do this, but let's, I don't think it's necessary to do this. I'm just going to say save. So now I've got something called farm. I go to the group set type. There it is. And I can add pharmacy to the different types of all units that we have.
Okay. So, Bob, correct me if I'm wrong. Scott, what Bob was asking is, how would we go? How would we support this case where you create a new category in this case, a new type like pharmacy, and how would DHIS let resource map know that there's a new type and that type is pharmacy and its code is farm, so that in the future when you want to update a given facility, you just say, okay, the new type of this facility is farm.
Yeah, I'll show you what. Okay, there it is. I'm just going to delete this one so I don't mess up my data. We expose that thing as what is it? It's an organization unit group sets. So if we look at type here, that doesn't show us very much. If I look at the XML rendition, okay, there you go. So you can pull at any time the organization unit here, the organization unit group set here of name equals type, and this will give you all the options that are within it. So if you were going the other way, right? If we needed to pull the categorizations from Resource Mapper and push them into DHIS, we would post something like this. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's what we should define at the Thread API level, I think.
Yeah. So this is what I want to understand from Resource Mapper's perspective: is what would I need to post in order to do the equivalent?
Yeah.
It might not exist.
Yeah, there's not something as direct. There's a way. I mean, you could build a JSON post to the layers endpoint, but I think that wouldn't be as straightforward as just sending a field representation or something like that. I would prefer to make a specific API for that.
Yeah, so it's something that we should standardize. I think there are issues related to it. But I don't want to spend 3 months getting that right. I want to get a hack to work first.
Okay.
So I think we learn a bit by doing that. You know how
yeah, of course. Let me. I will look into it and see what kind of JSON you should send
Okay, that's
to,
cool.
to do exactly that. If you want, could you send me the that example XML, the one with the definition of these values?
Sure, I can send you the JSON version as well. Well, the easiest thing, I'll send you the URL where you can pull them from the demo site, so you can experiment.
Okay, awesome, great.
This is one of the reasons why I dislike JSON with a passion. It just encourages anarchy. If we were dealing
Yeah,
with XML, it would be very easy to declaratively express this stuff.
mm, I'm not sure whether that's a problem of the format.
No,
I
it's
mean,
not a problem with the,
it's just
but
you just
there's no formal mechanism for describing the problem that we have in JSON. Whereas in XML, it's part of the extended tool set. That's why you have schemas. Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, I should say, Scott, that I mean I was there for 2 weeks, and of that time, I maybe spent 2 days on the facility registry stuff. I just spent the first week on basic infrastructure stuff. They were moving their servers out of the ministry, and so we had to reinstall and upgrade and
mm,
fix the DHCP on their network and all kinds of other stuff that goes with infrastructuring. And then in terms of sort of interoperability scenarios, I had four to deal with, which resource mapper was just one. And so this kind of time was split. So resource mapper has become a bit of a take-home assignment for me. But it's been interesting trying to do it. One very minor quirk, I suppose, I would. It's not really anything to do with the software, but maybe more to do with the implementation. You don't have SSL certificate on that site. I really don't like sending my passwords around. Um, is that something that you're considering doing, or is it something that you're treating as a kind of MOH concern, which I guess it is really?
yeah. Yeah, it's actually that instance you are using is not under our control, so there's not much we can do on ourselves to push that. But we can contact the guys who administer the server. So sorry, I'm hearing myself and it's a bit difficult to articulate. But we can talk with Andrew and Daniel to move that forward.
Yeah, but I mean, this is not really a Fred API concern, but I mean, I've spent 2 years now persuading Ministry of Health they need to use SSL on their HMIS system, and now finally, after 2 years, we've actually got a certificate on it. Um, and I just want to continue that momentum. And so if you guys have systems there, then tell them they have to use SSL, even if they don't think that the data is very private, which it's not. It still means
Hmm.
we have to send our passwords backwards and forwards.
Sure.
And people have a bad habit of using the same password they use for their electronic banking and
Yeah,
goodness
I
knows what
understand.
else.
Yeah,
So,
we'll
so just advocacy, right? So wherever you are, wherever you set up, wherever you're dealing with them, just tell them it's important. They need to put it on.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Who? Sorry, I didn't understand the question. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh.
Yeah, that was Edith. Um, I mean, if you're interested, I can give you the rundown of what the ICT support looks like. Um, they used to have a guy there called Daniel Morenzi. I don't know if you know Daniel. Or you, um, he was like the CTO, I guess, within the Ministry of Health.
Okay.
Uh, Unfortunately, they just lost him. He's gone off to Uganda to work with the East Africa Commission. So we'll be dealing with him again, but at the regional level now. But
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, Daniel knew a fair bit of network stuff, but he took it all with him. And so there's a lady who's in charge now called Edith. Edith
How do you
is
spell that?
Edith, Edith. I don't remember the surname off the top of my head.
Edith. Okay.
Edith's very nice, but I mean, her background is really coming from that era of desktop support, and
Mm.
so doesn't really understand things like DNS and DHCP and what have you. And I spent my first 2 days there. Every time I go to Rwanda, I actually do the same thing. I go hunting around the network, turning off all the DHCP servers. I mean, they buy a new wireless router and just plug it onto the network, and there's about 5 different devices giving out DHCP, and
Yeah.
it's very difficult figuring out their reserve pools and
Mm.
stuff like that. So the network was a bit of a mess. It's much improved now. I think we've just simplified it. I think what we saw last week was actually a bit of a blip, because after I saw that email, I SSH'd into the Ministry of Health network, one of the servers that we look after in there. And from there, I could get out to facility registry fine.
Yeah.
So I haven't heard more from Randy saying that there was a problem. So I'm sure it was a blip.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, look, I'm big in favor of installing locally. I think it develops capacity, gives them more leverage in terms of governance of the systems. Um, but there are difficulties, right? And there's just establishing a stable platform. I mean, the huge problem they have within Ministry of Health, they've got a little data center in there, but it's got a UPS which is bigger than my fridge. It's a massive great thing. It doesn't work, right? So every time the power goes down, the UPS makes a funny noise, and then all the servers. And at the moment, the power is failing about 2 or 3 times a day. So it's a really hazardous environment in which to try to run services, and that includes now their DHCP and their DNS is running off a Windows server, which is sitting on the same wobbly power supply. So I mean, they're going to get these things. Um, I think the solution that they have, and it's what I've recommended elsewhere, is something similar in Ghana, is to make use of local ISP in the city. And that's a really nice data center, that the private data center which they're hosting the stuff in now. I don't know if you guys have ever visited, but it seems really well run, and unlike the rest of Rwanda, there seems to be power all the time. They have the right kind of cooling in place, and um, much better than for them, I think, than operating it in a cloud. I mean, one of the I guess say one of the cloud issues that comes up. I mean, a good case from one of the states in India, I won't tell you which, but the problem with government procurement is, and I don't know what it's like in the US, but most countries in the world, I know, you have these sort of purchase orders, and every now and again they get late. So a lot of vendors don't like dealing with government, even though in the long term it's good because there's lots of money to be made. But in the short term, you may have a situation where they don't pay the bill for 3 months or for 4 months. Now, if you've got your health system with a cloud provider, provider can cut your service, and that's what they did, right? To this Indian state, they cut their service and say, "Well, you get back on when you pay the bill." Now, you see, if you're a local service provider in the city of Kigali or city of Accra, then government has stronger leverage over you. This was one of the examples of where there are good reasons to keep this stuff in country. Same reason why US government uses Amazon government cloud inside the US. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Not from my side.
Sorry, had the mute. It's pretty interesting discussion. If you don't mind, you mentioned passing that URL. Would I also be able to have a look at that, Bob?
I do it now. In fact, let me just find it first. Yeah, well, no, the one I was showing you was just running on my local host, but we have a demo instance. I just want to tell you where it is. apps.dhis2.org demo. All right, I'm just going to paste this to you. Copy. Find your window again. Where are you guys? Ah, there you are. Okay, that's our demo instance. If you change demo to dev, then you get our kind of current trunk build. And that gets
Okay.
So that's much less stable, but I mean that gets updated frequently. So if you're looking at what's happening on the bleeding edge, you can get into dev. The globally known password is admin district. The web API on it. Can I share my screen again? Start the screen share. On my screen. I am sharing my screen. Are you seeing this window? Okay, go to the admin district. This is obviously logging in with cookies through the front end, but if you're working with the API, you see it's there. Then all of these things are API points, and you've got a where's the stuff we were looking at?
Sorry, where did you click? What API?
Sorry?
Where did you click to get that?
It's actually under. Yeah.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I'm there.
But if you're doing this programmatically, you wouldn't be going through that way anyway. You just learn to remember that it's API.
Yeah, sure.
So the org unit groups, you get an all of these resources are the same. You get an XML representation, you get a JSON representation, and different JSON experimentation. The other point which is not in here is a more generic. Now this is the one I actually find much more useful. Can you read what I've typed there?
No.
Metadata, yeah, the general metadata XML. I'm going to do the XML version because I know it better. And
API. I'm not.
Okay, and that's just downloaded me an empty XML file. What I should do is I'll point you to the page in the manual that describes this metadata XML. Because basically that's what we would use if we're posting metadata into DHIS. All right, we would post to this API point. As far as I know, most of these are great for browsing the API. They're not so. I don't think you can post into them.
Okay.
To post, you post into this point. But that's described in the manual. Let me Google the manual. Without Google, I would know nothing. Deny. It's not this, but it's near this. As soon as I get to it, I post it into the chat window. How do we go up? Home. Down, 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 down. Big manual. There.
Okay. Can you paste that on?
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. Yeah, okay, so those are the 2 points you can play with. As I say, demo is more stable. Login is admin district, and there's a bit of description there of what's in there. What I should also be much more relevant probably to this group is the version 1.0 Fred implementation, which is also there, which I think is called Fred API for the. No, what is it called? API Fred. There you go. This is also something you can explore.
Okay.
Right. So that's between those two different APIs, that's the way you'd get data in and out of DHIS. The DHIS Fred implementation is kind of similar. Where we start to diverge, interesting enough, is around the properties, which is exactly, I guess, the point of the earlier part of our discussion, that we need a way of trying to harmonize those. Right.
Yeah.
Good.
No. Just wanted to go over the items I noted down, but they were the same as the ones.